Let me tell you something I saw with my own eyes. I was there. I was on the observation deck of Ketharis Station when it came through the jump gate, and I swear to you, the whole station went silent. Not quiet. Silent. Like somebody had reached into the walls and pulled the sound out of the air. You have to understand what Ketharis Station was before I tell you about that day. Because if you don't understand what it was, you won't understand why what happened happened. Ketharis sat at the edge of the Volari Reach, right on the border between the Empire's core territories and the wild dark past the Third Arm. It was old, older than most of the officers stationed there. The metal of its outer hull had been patched and repatched so many times it looked like a quilt somebody's grandmother stitched together over 100 years. There were corridors on the lower decks where the lights still flickered, because nobody had gotten around to replacing the conduits since before I was born. I worked in cargo logistics. That's not a glamorous job. I moved crates. I logged manifests. I argued with dockmasters about berthing fees. I'd been doing it for 11 years, and in all that time, nothing interesting ever happened on Ketharis. That was the whole point of the place. It was a rest stop, a refueling depot, a spot where freighter captains stopped to drink cheap synthil and complain about their engines before pushing on to somewhere that actually mattered. So when I say the station went silent, understand that I had never once, in 11 years, heard it go silent. It was a shift change when it happened. Third bell. The observation deck was crowded because the day crews were coming off and the night crews were coming on, and everybody stops on the observation deck. Habit. You just do. You come off a 12-hour shift moving cargo, and you stop at the big curved window and you look out at the stars and you breathe for a minute before you go back to your bunk. That day I was standing next to a Threthan dockworker named Asuk. Big fellow. 4 arms, gray skin, always smelled like machine oil no matter how many times he washed. We weren't friends exactly, but we'd worked the same berths for years. And we had that easy silence you get with somebody you've been around a long time. Asuk was the one who noticed first. "Gate spinning up," he said. I looked, he was right. The jump gate at the far end of the system was starting to glow. That blue-white ring of light that meant something was coming through, which by itself wasn't unusual. Ships came through all the time. Freighters or haulers, the occasional imperial patrol cutter checking papers. But the gate kept glowing, and it kept spinning up, and the ring of light got brighter and brighter, and I remember Asuk making this low clicking sound in his throat, which is what Threthan do when they're nervous. "That's a big spin," he said. "That's a real big spin. You don't spin the gate that big for a freighter." He was right about that too. Now I need to back up, because you can't understand what came through the gate without understanding the situation the whole galaxy was in at that time. The humans had shown up about 6 years before. Nobody knew much about them. They came from some backwater system out past the frontier, a little wet world nobody had ever bothered to survey properly. When they first made contact, the Empire treated them the way the Empire treated everybody new, dismissively. Politely but dismissively. Sign the trade agreements, pay your tariffs, stay in your lane, don't cause trouble. And for a while that's what the humans did. They traded. They were good traders actually, sharp. They had this way of looking at a deal and finding the one loose thread and pulling it until the whole thing unraveled in their favor. Merchants started to dread seeing a human walk into their negotiations. But nobody was afraid of them. Why would you be? They were soft, squishy little things, no natural armor, no venom, no claws worth mentioning. Their homeworld had a gravity most species considered mild. Their eyes only saw a narrow slice of the spectrum. On paper, on every chart the Imperial Survey Corps ever drew up, humans were unremarkable, average, middle of the pack. There was a saying that went around back then. Humans are the galaxy's clerks, meaning good at paperwork, good at numbers, not good for much else. I used to say it too. I'm not proud of that, but I said it. Then came the Keth border incident. You might have heard about it. Most people have now, but at the time it happened it barely made the news feeds. A small thing, a skirmish out on the frontier. The Keth were pirates mostly. Raiders who'd carved out a little kingdom for themselves in the ungoverned dark, and they preyed on anybody weak enough to prey on. They'd been harassing human colony ships for a while because everybody knew humans were soft, and soft things are easy pickings. So the Keth raided a human colony convoy. 12 ships, families aboard, farmers and technicians and their children heading out to settle some empty rock the humans had claimed. The Keth expected an easy score. They'd done it 100 times to 100 other species. I don't know exactly what happened out there. Nobody does, not really, because there weren't many Keth left to tell it. But I know the humans didn't run. I know they didn't negotiate. I know that when the raiders came in expecting frightened farmers, they found something else. 3 human escort ships, old ships, converted freighters with weapons bolted on, outgunned, outnumbered, technically inferior in every measurable way. The Keth raiding fleet was 14 vessels strong. Not one of them came home. Here's the part that got everybody's attention. It wasn't that the humans won. Upsets happen. It was how they won. The Imperial Survey Corps recovered some of the wreckage later, and they pieced together what happened. And when the report came out, people who read it got quiet. The humans had let the Keth commit. Let them close in. Let them think they had the humans dead to rights. And then the human ships had done something no sane commander would ever do. They'd rammed. Deliberately. One human ship, badly damaged, engines failing, had pointed its nose at the Keth flagship and pushed its reactor past every safety limit and driven itself straight into the enemy's bridge. The pilot didn't have to. He could have surrendered. The Keth took prisoners sometimes, sold them as labor. He had options. He chose the reactor. And the thing is, in the recovered comms right before the end, he wasn't screaming. He wasn't panicking. He said something, just a few words to his crew, calm as anything. Get the colony ships behind us. We've got this. We've got this. 3 old freighters against 14 raiders, one of them already dying, and the human pilot said we've got this like he was talking about moving a couch. That report went around the whole empire, and for the first time, when people said humans are the galaxy's clerks, somebody else in the room would go quiet and think about a man who drove his ship into an enemy flagship rather than let farmers die, and say a calm little, "We've got this," while he did it. But that was years ago, and it was one incident, and the empire is enormous and memory is short. By the time I'm telling you about, on the observation deck of Ketharis Station, most people had gone back to thinking of humans as clerks, sharp traders, nothing more. The empire itself had never really taken them seriously as a power. Why would it? The empire had 10,000 years of history. It had war fleets that could crack planets. It had client species numbering in the hundreds, and a bureaucracy so vast it had its own gravity. The humans had one small solar system, a handful of colonies, and a reputation for being good with numbers. So when relations between the empire and the humans started getting frosty, and they did, over trade rights and border zones and a few too many incidents where human ships were detained for inspection and came back with damage, nobody on Ketharis worried about it. Politics. Distant politics. Not our problem. Then the gate started spinning up. "That's not a freighter," Asuk said again. He'd gone very still. All 4 of his arms hanging loose at his sides, which for a Threthan is a sign of real unease. They fidget when they're calm. They freeze when they're scared. The observation deck had noticed now. People were crowding toward the window. I heard the murmur start, that low buzz of a crowd realizing something's wrong. Somebody called down to operations to ask what was coming through, and I couldn't hear the answer, but I saw the woman who'd called go pale. The gate reached full spin. The blue-white ring blazed so bright it hurt to look at. And then it came through. I have tried so many times to describe the ship that came through that gate, and I always fail, Because the problem isn't describing what it looked like. The problem is describing what it felt like. It was big. That's the first thing. Bigger than anything I'd ever seen dock at Ketharis. Bigger than the imperial dreadnoughts that passed through once a year on patrol. It came out of the gate slow, unhurried, the way something enormous moves when it has no reason to rush. It was dark, not black exactly. A deep, dull gray, the color of a storm cloud right before it breaks. No decoration. No banners. The Empire loved to decorate its warships, gold filigree house crests, the imperial sunburst blazoned across every hull. This ship had none of that. It had a single marking small near the bow in a script none of us could read. And it was scarred. That's what got me. This ship, this monster the size of a small city, was covered in battle scars, long gouges in the armor. Patches of newer metal where old damage had been cut out and replaced, scorch marks. A whole section of the port flank looked like it had been caved in and hammered back out. This wasn't a parade ship. This wasn't a symbol. This was a working weapon that had been used over and over and had survived every time. It didn't look proud. It looked tired. It looked like a soldier who'd seen too much and kept getting up anyway. Asuk made that clicking sound again, softer now. The scars, he said. You see the scars, they didn't buff them out, they left them. Why would you leave them? I didn't answer. I was thinking the same thing. Every other species in the galaxy repaired their ships to look pristine. Damage was shame. You hid it. You made your warship look untouchable, because looking untouchable was half the battle. The humans left their scars showing. Later I understood why. It wasn't neglect, it was a message. Look at everything that tried to kill us. Look at how it failed. The ship's name came through on the station broadcast a moment later, in the standard trade tongue, in a flat human voice that didn't sound worried about anything at all. Ketharis Station, this is the human vessel Perseverance. We are requesting permission to dock. We have diplomatic personnel aboard requiring transit to the Imperial Core. Please advise. Perseverance. I remember thinking, what a strange name for a warship. The Empire named its ships things like Glorious Dominion and Sword of the Ascendant and Unbroken Majesty. Big names, proud names, names meant to make you feel small. The humans named their war machine Perseverance, which isn't a proud word at all. It's a stubborn word. It's a word about refusing to quit. It's the word you use for somebody who keeps getting knocked down and keeps standing back up, not because they're winning, but because they will not ever stay down. The name told you everything about them, if you were listening. The station didn't answer right away. I found out later there was a whole panic happening in operations. Because Ketharis was a small station, a border depot, and it had no idea a human warship was coming, and it had no protocol for it. And the station commander was a middling imperial officer named Vresk who had gotten this posting because he'd annoyed the wrong superior. And this was as close to exile as the Empire could manage without actually calling it that. Commander Vresk, from what I heard, spent about 4 minutes trying to raise Imperial command for instructions and getting nothing but static and delay, because the Imperial Core was 3 jumps away, and the light lag on urgent traffic was brutal. So he made a decision, and it was the wrong one. He denied the docking request. Human vessel Perseverance, the station comm crackled, and this time it was Vresk's voice, tight and official. You are not cleared for docking. This is a restricted Imperial facility. You will hold your position and await inspection by Imperial authorities. Any attempt to dock without authorization will be considered a hostile act. Acknowledge. Silence on the channel. The whole observation deck was dead quiet now. 100 beings pressed against the window, watching that scarred gray mountain float in the dark, and every single one of us was holding our breath. Asuk whispered, "Why would he do that? Why would he say that?" Because Vresk was scared is why. And scared people, especially scared people with a little bit of authority, do stupid things to feel big. The channel stayed silent for a long moment. 10 seconds. 15. I counted because counting was the only thing keeping me from screaming. Then the human voice came back, still flat, still calm, but there was something under it now, something I hadn't heard before. Not anger. Anger would have been fine. Anger you can understand. It was patience. The terrible, bottomless patience of somebody who has done this before and knows exactly how it ends, and is a little bit sad that it has to end that way again. "Commander," the human said, "I'm going to give you some advice because I don't think you understand your situation, and I'd rather you understood it than found out the hard way." You could have heard a pin drop on that observation deck. 100 beings, not one of them breathing. "My ship is carrying an ambassador," the human went on. "She is one of 11 people alive who can stop the war that your empire has spent the last 2 years trying to start. She is tired. She has been traveling for a very long time, and she would like to dock at your station, have a meal, sleep in a bed that isn't bolted to a bulkhead, and continue on to your capital in the morning to try to save both our peoples a great deal of grief." A pause. "You've denied that request, which is your right, it's your station, but I want to make sure you understand what you've actually done. You haven't stopped my ship. You can't stop my ship. There is nothing on this station or in this system or in the 3 systems around it that can stop my ship. What you've done is tell an exhausted diplomat, who came here in good faith to prevent a war, that your empire would rather posture at her than show her basic courtesy. And she is going to remember that. And when your superiors ask her later why the negotiations went badly, she is going to tell them about a small man on a small station who was more interested in feeling important than in preventing the deaths of millions." Another pause, longer. "So here's what's going to happen, Commander. I'm going to ask you one more time, politely, and you're going to think, really think, about whether the thing you're protecting is worth what it's going to cost you. Ketharis Station, this is the Perseverance, requesting permission to dock. Please advise." I want to tell you that Vresk came to his senses, that he heard the reason in that voice and did the smart thing. He didn't. I found out later that Vresk had a superior back at the core, a high administrator named Kaloth, who had been feeding him a steady diet of anti-human propaganda for months. Humans were vermin. Humans were upstart primitives who needed to be put in their place. The Empire had tolerated them too long, and any officer who showed weakness toward them would find their career over. Vresk had swallowed all of it, because Vresk was the kind of man who swallowed whatever the powerful fed him and called it loyalty. So when the human ship asked one more time, politely, Vresk did the thing he thought would make Kaloth proud. He fired on it. I saw it happen. The station's main defense battery, an old iron cannon, powerful enough to disable a freighter, mounted on the dorsal ring, swung around and fired at the Perseverance. I remember screaming. I think a lot of us did. Because whatever you think about the humans, whatever the politics were, that ship was carrying a diplomat, and Vresk had just fired on a diplomatic vessel, and even a cargo clerk like me knew that was the kind of thing that started wars instead of stopping them. The ion blast crossed the space between the station and the ship in less than a second. And it hit the Perseverance dead center on its scarred flank. And nothing happened. I don't mean the shot missed. I mean it hit square on and the ship's shields flared once, a ripple of pale light across the hull, and then the light faded and the ship just sat there, unmoved, unbothered, like a mountain that had been struck by a raindrop. The ion cannon on Ketharis was the biggest gun on the station. It was the thing that made Vresk feel safe out here on the edge of nowhere. And the Perseverance had absorbed its full blast the way you'd absorb a tap on the shoulder. Asuk made a sound I'd never heard a Threthin make, a kind of low moan. "It didn't even move," he said. "It didn't even move." The human voice came back on the channel, and now, for the first time, the patience was gone. Commander Vresk, it said, flat, cold, every word placed down like a stone. You just fired on a diplomatic vessel carrying an accredited ambassador. That is an act of war under your own empire's laws. I want you to sit with that for a second. You, not your empire. You personally just started a war. Congratulations. The observation deck had gone from silent to chaos. People were shouting. Some were running for the escape pods. A Threthan woman near me had collapsed and her friends were trying to lift her. The station's alarm klaxons had started up, that awful rising wail, and red emergency lights were washing everything in the color of blood. And through all of it, the Perseverance just floated there, dark and scarred and patient. And I understood, we all understood, that it could have destroyed us at any moment. That it had absorbed our best shot without flinching, and it had not fired back. And the only reason we were all still alive was that the humans had chosen not to kill us. That's a terrible thing to understand about somebody, that your life is a choice they're making, that you're breathing because they've decided for now to let you. I'm not going to destroy your station, the human voice said, as if it had heard my thoughts. I want to be very clear about that because I can see on your sensors that half your crew is running for the pods and I don't want anyone doing something stupid out of panic. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I came here to prevent a war, not start one. Even now, even after you shot at me. A pause. But we're past the point where I can pretend nothing happened. You fired on an ambassador. That has to have consequences, or it invites everyone to do it. So here's what's going to happen, and I need everyone on that station to listen carefully, because I'm only going to say it once. Everyone listened. Believe me, everyone listened. I am going to dock at your station, the human said. You are not going to stop me because you can't. When I dock, I am going to send across a boarding party. They are not going to hurt anyone. They are going to walk to your command deck, and they are going to take Commander Vresk into custody, and he is going to answer to my ambassador for the crime of firing on a diplomatic mission. Everyone else on this station is free to go about their business. Nobody else is in any danger. Do you understand me? The channel crackled. Somebody in operations, not Vresk, answered in a voice thin with terror. We understand. We understand, please, we understand. Good, the human said, and then softer, almost gentle. Nobody's going to get hurt. I promise you that. I know you're all scared. I know most of you had nothing to do with this. It's going to be all right. Just stay where you are, stay calm, and this will be over soon. And you know what? I believed him. I don't know why. This was the being whose ship had just shrugged off our biggest gun. This was, by every measure, the most dangerous thing that had ever come near Ketharis Station. And I believed him when he said it was going to be all right. Because he'd had every reason to kill us, and he hadn't. Because when he had all the power in the world, the first thing he'd done was tell a deck full of terrified strangers that they were safe. The Perseverance began to move toward the docking ring. Slow, deliberate. It rotated as it came, lining up its docking collar with the station's largest berth, the one we used for the big ore haulers. And I want to describe how it moved because it stuck with me. Every warship I'd ever seen move was aggressive about it, all sharp turns and hard burns, showing off, throwing its weight around. The Perseverance moved the way a very large, very calm person moves through a crowded room, careful not to bump anyone, aware of exactly how much space it took up, powerful but considerate. It was terrifying. And it was, somehow, the most respectful thing I'd ever watched a ship do. Asuk had stopped moaning. He was just staring now, all four hands pressed flat against the window. I've been on this station 9 years, he said quietly. 9 years. I've seen imperial dreadnoughts. I've seen the Sunburst fleet come through with all their gold and their banners. And I've never seen anything move like that. That's not a machine flying a ship. That's a person flying a ship. Somebody who cares whether they hurt us. He was right. That was exactly it. The imperial ships were machines wearing armor. The Perseverance was something with a soul steering it. and the soul did not want to hurt us. And that made it so much more frightening than any dreadnought, because you cannot reason with a machine, but you can be judged by a person, and we had all just been found wanting. The docking clamps engaged with a boom that echoed through the whole station. I felt it in my feet. The Perseverance had connected. And then we waited. The whole observation deck, the whole station, held its breath and waited to see what would come through that airlock. What a human looked like up close. What kind of monster could pilot a ship that laughed at our guns? I'd never seen a human in person. Few of us on the frontier had. We had ideas. Propaganda pictures mostly, the kind Callow's office pumped out, humans drawn as snarling brutes, all teeth and cruelty. Some of us imagined them huge, giants to match their giant ship. Some imagined them cold, machine-like, without feeling. The airlock cycled, the inner door slid open, and a human stepped through. She was small. That was the first thing. She was small. She came up to about my shoulder, and I'm not a large person by the standards of my species. She had brown skin and dark hair pulled back tight, and she wore a plain gray uniform with no rank markings I could read, and she looked, more than anything else, tired. She wasn't a monster, she wasn't a giant. She was a small, tired person, and when she stepped out of that airlock and saw the crowd of us pressed against the observation deck window above the docking bay, staring down at her in terror, she did something I will never forget. She raised one hand, palm out, and she gave us a small, exhausted, apologetic little wave. Like she was sorry, like she knew she'd scared us and she felt bad about it, and this small wave was the only apology she could offer. Behind her came 4 more humans, and these ones did look like soldiers, bigger, armored, moving with that watchful economy that soldiers have. But they took their cue from her. They didn't point their weapons at anyone. They kept them lowered. They formed up around her, protective, and they scanned the crowd not like predators looking for prey, but like guardians looking for threats to the small, tired woman in the middle. And the small, tired woman, the ambassador, the one whose arrival had made a station commander so afraid he'd started a war, looked up at all of us and spoke. Her voice carried through the bay's speakers, soft and clear. "I'm sorry about all this," she said. "Truly, this isn't how I wanted to arrive. Nobody's in trouble except the man who fired on my ship, and even he's just going to have a conversation, not a firing squad. I know you're frightened. I've been frightened too, plenty of times. It passes. Go back to your families tonight. Hug them. And know that whatever your empire's leaders decide to do about my people, I bear none of you any ill will. You're just folks trying to get by out here on the edge of things. So am I, so are we all." I have thought about that speech 1,000 times since. Because here's the thing, she had us. She had all of us. Her ship had just proven it could kill everyone on that station without breaking a sweat. Her soldiers were armed and armored and standing right there. She held every card. There was nothing we could have done to stop her from doing absolutely anything she wanted. And what she wanted was for us to go home and hug our families. That's power. Real power, not the kind Vresk had, the kind that fires guns to feel important. The kind that could burn the world down, and chooses instead to be kind. Asuk was crying. I didn't know Threthin could cry, but he was, gray tears running down his gray face, and he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, "We were wrong about them. Weren't we? We were so wrong." I didn't answer because I couldn't. My throat had closed up. The 4 human soldiers moved off toward the command deck to collect Vresk. The ambassador stayed by the airlock, and a couple of the braver station crew went down to speak with her, and I watched from above as she shook their hands and spoke to them gently, and even, at one point, laughed at something one of them said. A real laugh, tired but real. And while all this was happening down in the docking bay, 3 jumps away at the Imperial core, the news was reaching the highest levels of the Empire. A human warship had appeared at the frontier. It had absorbed a full ion battery blast without damage. It had, with total ease, overridden the authority of an imperial station commander, and it was now sitting docked at Ketharis while its ambassador prepared to travel to the capital. And somewhere in the vast machinery of the imperial government, an alarm went out. Not a public one. A quiet one, running up through the chain of command, from the border monitoring stations to the fleet coordinators to the war council to, eventually, the office of the emperor himself. The message was simple. It said, the humans have shown us their smallest ship, and we could not scratch it. Advise immediate response. Their smallest ship, because that's what the Perseverance was, a single vessel, an escort, a diplomatic transport with a warship's hull, not a fleet, not a battle group. One ship sent to carry one tired woman to a meeting. And it had made the Galactic Empire, 10,000 years old, master of 100 worlds, declare a state of emergency. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because the state of emergency and everything that came after the fleet, the standoff, the thing that happened at the capital that changed the whole galaxy, that all came later. That first day, on Ketharis Station, all we knew was that a small tired woman had stepped off a scarred gray ship, waved at us apologetically, and told us to go home and hug our families. I did actually go home. Not to family, I didn't have any on the station, but I went back to my bunk and I sat on the edge of it and I shook for about an hour. Delayed shock, I suppose. And then I got up and I went to the mess and I sat with Asuk and neither of us said much, and we drank cheap synthil until our hands stopped trembling. At some point Asuk said, "Do you think they'll go to war, the Empire and the humans?" And I thought about the ship, the scars they didn't buff out, the name Perseverance. The man in that old report who'd driven his reactor into an enemy flagship and said we've got this like he was moving furniture. The small tired woman who could have killed us all and instead told us to go hug our families. I think, I said slowly, that if the Empire is smart, it won't. And if it's not smart? I didn't answer that, because I already knew, deep down, that the Empire wasn't going to be smart. The Empire was too old and too proud and too used to being the biggest thing in every room. It had spent 10,000 years never having to persevere at anything, because it had never once been in danger of losing. The humans had spent their whole short history persevering, because they'd always been the underdog, always the small ones, always the squishy little clerks nobody took seriously. And I had just watched what happens when you take a species that has spent its entire existence learning how to survive against impossible odds, and you make the mistake of thinking their smallness means they're weak. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept going back to the observation deck. The Perseverance was still docked, dark and patient and scarred, and I stood at the window and looked at it for a long time. And I noticed something I hadn't seen before in all the terror of the day. Down near the bow, next to that small, unreadable marking, there was a row of symbols, little marks etched into the hull, dozens of them, and I realized, staring at them, that they were tally marks, a count of something. I asked a human crewman about it weeks later, when things had calmed down and I'd gotten to know a few of them. I pointed at the marks and asked what they counted. He looked at me, this young human with a scar over one eye, and he said something I've never forgotten. "Those aren't kills," he said. "Everybody thinks they're kills, they're not. Each one of those marks is a time this ship should have died, a time we got hit and shouldn't have made it, a time the odds said we were finished." He counted them with his eyes, this private tally, and then he looked back at me. "We keep them so we don't forget, so we remember that we're not supposed to be here, that every day we're still flying is a day we earned by not giving up when we should have. A time this ship should have died. Dozens of them. And it was still here. That's perseverance, friend. That's what the word means. Not winning, not being the strongest, just refusing, absolutely, stubbornly, gloriously refusing to stay down. The Empire never understood that. It thought strength was about being unbreakable. The humans knew better. The humans knew you're going to break. Everyone breaks eventually. The whole game is what you do after. And what the humans did, every single time, was get back up. That was the day everything changed. The day the smallest human ship arrived at the smallest imperial station, and the biggest empire in the galaxy realized, for the first time in 10,000 years, that it might have finally met something it couldn't push around. The state of emergency went out that night. By morning, the whole galaxy was holding its breath. So the state of emergency went out. And I want to tell you what that actually looked like, because I ended up in the middle of it, in a way I never expected. You see, after that first night, I didn't go back to moving cargo. Not right away. The station was in chaos. Half the crew had put in transfer requests. Vresk was locked in his own brig, awaiting whatever the ambassador decided to do with him. And into all that mess came a request I never in 100 years thought I'd receive. The ambassador wanted a local liaison. Somebody who knew the station, knew the frontier, knew how things actually worked out here. Somebody who wasn't imperial military, wasn't a politician, just a regular working being who could tell her the truth. And for reasons I still don't fully understand, they picked me. I think it was Asuk's doing, honestly. He talked to one of the human soldiers during the cleanup, and my name had come up, and the next thing I knew there was a knock on my bunk door, and a young human woman standing there asking if I'd be willing to come aboard the Perseverance and help. I said yes, of course I said yes, you don't say no to that. The inside of that ship was nothing like I expected. I'd built it up in my head, you understand. A ship that could shrug off an iron battery, a ship covered in scars, crewed by the fiercest warriors in the galaxy. I expected the inside to be all cold metal and hard edges and grim, silent soldiers. It wasn't. It was warm. The corridors were lit soft and yellow like sunlight. There were plants, actual living plants, growing in little planters bolted to the walls at every junction. There was a smell of cooking coming from somewhere, something with spices I didn't recognize. And there was noise, human noise, somebody laughing down a side corridor, music playing quietly in a rec room I passed, two crewmen arguing cheerfully about some game they'd played the night before. It felt like a home, a cramped, busy, lived-in home that happened to be a warship. The young woman who'd fetched me, her name was Rhea, I learned, saw my face and smiled. Not what you pictured. No, I admitted, I thought it would be more military. We're plenty military when we need to be. She led me around a corner, past a wall covered in drawings. Children's drawings, I realized. Crude, colorful pictures of the ship, of stars, of stick-figure people. But you can't spend your whole life being military. You'd go crazy. So the rest of the time we just live. We eat, we argue, we grow tomatoes in the corridors, we let the crew's kids tape drawings to the walls. There are children aboard. A few, families of the long-haul crew. It's a long way from home, you bring what matters with you. She stopped and looked at me and her voice got a little softer. That's the thing your empire never understood about us, I think. They see the scars on the hull and they think we're a war machine. But we're not fighting because we love war. We're fighting because we love this. She gestured around at the warm corridor, the plants, the children's drawings. We're fighting so this gets to keep existing. That's all, that's the whole thing. The ambassador's name was Elena Marsh. I met her properly that first day aboard, in a small room she used as an office. It had a real wooden desk. I have no idea how they'd gotten actual wood all the way out here, and shelves of physical books, and a window looking out at the stars. She was drinking something hot from a chipped mug, and she looked, if anything, even more tired up close than she had from the observation deck. "Thank you for coming," she said, and she meant it. She stood up and shook my hand, this small, firm human handshake, and gestured for me to sit. "I know it's strange. I know I'm probably the last thing you wanted showing up at your station. But I need somebody who will tell me the truth about how things really are out here, and everybody imperial is too scared to, and everybody human is too far from home to know. So I'm asking you, will you help me?" "To do what?" I asked. She sat back down and wrapped both hands around her mug. "To stop a war that's going to kill millions of people, most of them yours, not mine." That surprised me. Mine. "Yes," she looked at me steadily. "Here's the thing nobody in your empire's leadership wants to admit, and here's why I need you to understand it so you can help me make them understand it. If it comes to war between the empire and humanity, the empire will lose. Not maybe. Not probably. Certainly. And it won't be close." I must have looked skeptical, because she smiled a little sad. "You saw my ship take your station's best shot without a scratch," she said. "You saw that. Now understand, the Perseverance is old. It's a second-line vessel. It's the ship we send to carry diplomats because it's not needed on the front. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Your empire's best gun couldn't scratch our diplomatic transport." The room felt very cold suddenly. "The empire doesn't know that yet," she went on. "It's declared a state of emergency. It's mustering its fleets. It's getting ready to teach the upstart humans a lesson. And every soul in those fleets is going to die, and they don't have to, and I am trying to get to your capital and sit down with your leaders and show them the math before they throw away a generation of their own people out of pride. That's why I'm here. That's the whole reason. Not conquest. Not revenge. I'm trying to save the lives of people who fired on my ship yesterday. And I need help because they will not listen and I don't have much time." That was Elena Marsh. In one conversation, she turned my whole understanding of the situation inside out. I'd thought the humans were the threat. I'd thought the state of emergency was the empire protecting itself. And instead, here was this small, tired woman telling me that the real danger was the empire's own pride, and that she'd come all this way, alone on an old ship, to try to save the empire from itself. "Why do you care?" I asked her. "Why would you want to save us? We fired on you. We've been detaining your ships for years, damaging them. Kaloth's office calls your people vermin. Why would you cross the galaxy to keep us from getting ourselves killed?" She was quiet for a while. She looked out the window at the stars. "Because," she said finally, "a long time ago, when we were young and small and nobody in the galaxy took us seriously, we learned something the hard way. We learned that when a bigger power decides you're worthless and decides to grind you down, the only thing worse than fighting back is fighting back with cruelty. Winning isn't enough. How you win is everything. We could crush your empire. But if we do it because we're angry, because we want revenge, because we want to show you what it feels like to be the small one, then we become the thing we hated. We become the boot instead of the face under it." She turned back to me. "So we don't do that. We try, every single time, to find the way that ends with the fewest people dead, even the people who shot at us. Especially the people who shot at us, because those are the ones most likely to die if this goes wrong. It's harder. It's so much harder than just winning. But it's the only way to win, and still be somebody worth being afterward." I have carried those words with me my whole life since. Winning isn't enough. How you win is everything. That's the human philosophy right there. That's what made them what they are, not the ships, not the guns that. Meanwhile, 3 jumps away, the Empire was doing exactly the opposite. I pieced this together later, from the transcripts that came out after everything, but I'll tell it to you now so you understand what we were up against. The state of emergency had gone all the way up to the Emperor. And the Emperor, his name was Thos IX, an old man who'd sat the throne for 60 years and had never in all that time faced a genuine threat. The Emperor had convened his war council. And the war council was dominated by exactly the wrong people. High Administrator Kaloth, the one who'd been feeding Vreska's anti-human poison, sat at the Emperor's right hand. And Kaloth had spent his whole career building his power on the idea that the Empire was invincible, and anyone who suggested otherwise was a coward and a traitor. He had staked everything on the Empire being the strongest thing in the galaxy. And a human diplomatic transport shrugging off an ion battery threatened everything he'd built. So Kaloth did what men like that always do. He lied. He told the Emperor the reports were exaggerated, that the human ship's invulnerability was a trick, some kind of sensor spoofing, that the ambassador's mission was a ruse to buy time while humanity prepared a sneak attack, that the only proper response was overwhelming force, a demonstration fleet sent to the frontier to crush the human ship, capture the ambassador, and show the galaxy that the Empire did not bend. One human ship, Kaloth reportedly told the War Council, however clever its tricks, cannot stand against the massed fleets of the Empire. We will meet this insolence with such force that humanity will never again dare to approach our borders. We will make an example of them so terrible that 1,000 years from now, mothers will frighten their children with the story of what happened to the humans who thought they could challenge us. And the Emperor, old and proud, and surrounded by men who told him only what he wanted to hear, agreed. The order went out. The 3rd and 7th fleets, over 200 warships including 6 planet cracker dreadnoughts, were dispatched to the frontier. Their orders were to destroy the Perseverance, capture Ambassador Marsh, and demonstrate imperial supremacy. They were, without knowing it, being sent to their deaths, all of them, 200 ships, hundreds of thousands of crew, sent to die for one man's pride. We got word of the approaching fleet about 4 days after the ambassador's arrival. I was in Elena's office when the message came through. Rhea brought it in, and I watched Elena's face as she read it, and I watched something in her go very still and very sad. 2 fleets, she said quietly. 6 dreadnoughts, they're not coming to talk. What do we do? I asked. She set the message down. She looked out the window for a long moment, and then she did something that has stayed with me forever. She started to cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just tears welling up and spilling over while her face stayed almost calm. The tears of somebody who has seen a terrible thing coming for a long time and has just watched it arrive. All those people, she whispered, all those crews. They're just following orders, they don't know. They have no idea what they're flying into, and I can't stop it. I tried. I came all this way and I tried and it wasn't enough, and now they're going to die. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, angry at herself for the tears. 200 ships. Do you know how many people that is? And Kaloth spent them like coins to protect his own reputation, to avoid admitting he was wrong. Can't you fight them off? I asked. You said the Perseverance. The Perseverance can destroy that fleet, she said flatly. Yes, it can. 1 ship against 200 and it would win, and it wouldn't even be difficult because their weapons can't hurt us and ours can't miss. That's not the problem. The problem is that if I do that, if I let this ship kill 200 imperial vessels, then I haven't prevented a war. I've started one. A real one. Because the Empire can't survive losing 2 fleets to a single ship. Its whole authority is built on being unbeatable. Show 100 client species that 1 human ship destroyed 2 imperial fleets, and the Empire falls apart in a year, and then you get chaos, warlords, 100 little wars across 100 worlds, and millions more dead than would have died in any clean fight. Winning the battle loses everything. She stood up and started pacing, and I could see her mind working fast, turning the problem over and over. There has to be a third way, she muttered. There's always a third way, not surrender, not slaughter. Something else, something that lets everybody walk away, there has to be. And here's where I got to watch a human mind do the thing that humans do better than any species I've ever encountered. She didn't panic. She didn't rage, she didn't give up. She sat back down at her wooden desk and she pulled out a pad of actual paper and she started writing. Options, possibilities, angles. She'd write something, frown at it, cross it out. Write something else. She talked to herself the whole time, a low, steady mutter, and she pulled in her officers, and they argued and they threw ideas around, and slowly, over hours, something took shape. I sat in the corner and watched, and what I was watching was perseverance again, but a different kind than I'd seen before. Not the perseverance of surviving a battle, the perseverance of refusing to accept that a problem has no good solution, of sitting with an impossible situation and simply not stopping until you've wrenched a way through it that nobody else could see. "All right," Elena said finally, and there was something new in her voice. Hope maybe, thin and fragile, but there. "All right, here's what we're going to do, and it's insane and it might not work, and if it doesn't a lot of people die anyway, but it's the best chance we've got." She looked around at all of us. "We're not going to fight the fleet," she said, "and we're not going to run from it, we're going to meet it, and I'm going to talk to them, not to Kaloth, not to the Emperor, to the fleet itself, to the crews, to the admirals flying those ships, because those are the people who are actually about to die, and those are the people who might, just might, be smart enough to see what Kaloth can't." "How?" one of her officers asked. "They'll open fire the second we're in range. Their orders are to destroy us on sight." Elena smiled, and it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of somebody about to bet everything on a single throw. "Let them," she said. "Let them fire. Let them empty every gun they have into this ship and watch it do nothing. And then I'll talk to them, because there is no argument in the galaxy more convincing than watching your entire fleet's firepower splash off a single hull like water off a stone. Cal told them we're weak, told them our strength is a trick. Let them prove it to themselves. Let them see the truth with their own eyes, and then they'll be ready to listen. I want to tell you about the day the fleet arrived, because I was there for that too, and it was the most frightening and the most extraordinary thing I have ever witnessed. The Perseverance had undocked from Ketharis and moved out to meet the fleet in open space, about a light minute from the station. Elena had insisted the station be evacuated first. She wouldn't risk civilian lives if the plan went wrong and most of the crew had gone, but I'd stayed. And Asuk had stayed. Neither of us could bear to leave without seeing how it ended. We watched from the Perseverance's own bridge. Elena had led us. She'd said, "If this works, I want witnesses who aren't human. I want beings the Empire will believe, to be able to say what really happened here." So we stood at the back of the bridge, Asuk and I, and we watched the fleet come through the jump gate. I will never forget it. 200 ships. They came through in waves, gates cycling over and over, ship after ship after ship pouring into the system. Imperial warships in their full glory gold filigree house crests, the sunburst blazoned across every hull, exactly the pristine untouchable beauty I'd expected the humans to have and hadn't found. And in the middle of them, 6 dreadnoughts, planet crackers. Ships so large they had their own weather, their own gravity, each one bristling with enough firepower to sterilize a world. 200 ships of gold and pride and death, arrayed against one scarred gray vessel that had left its wounds showing. "Oh," Asuk breathed beside me. Oh no, look at them all, look at them all." And in the center of it, Elena Marsh sat in a chair on the bridge of the Perseverance, small and tired, hands folded in her lap, watching 200 warships prepare to kill her, and she did not move, and she did not flinch, and she did not order a single weapon brought online. "Steady," she said quietly to her crew. "Everybody steady, shields to maximum, weapons stay cold, nobody fires, no matter what they do to us, nobody fires. Am I clear?" "Clear, ma'am," her crew answered, all of them calm as she was. I didn't understand how they could be so calm, 200 ships. And then I remembered the tally marks on the hull, a time this ship should have died. These people had faced death so many times that 200 warships was just one more mark, one more day they'd earn by not giving up. The Imperial fleet hailed us. A cold voice, an admiral's voice, filled the bridge. "Human vessel, you are in violation of Imperial law. You have attacked an imperial facility and are harboring a fugitive. By order of the Emperor, you are to surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. You have 30 seconds to comply. Failure to comply will result in your destruction. There will be no further warnings. Elena kept her calm. Her voice when she spoke was gentle, almost kind. "Admiral," she said, "my name is Elena Marsh. I'm an ambassador of humanity and I came here in peace to try to prevent exactly this. I know your orders. I know you think you have to do this, so I'm not going to ask you to disobey. I'm not going to ask you to surrender. I'm going to ask you for one thing and one thing only." A pause. "Go ahead and fire, all of you. Every gun you have, empty them into my ship. And then when you've done that and you see what happens, just talk to me for 5 minutes. That's all. Fire first if you have to, then talk 5 minutes. Can you give me that, Admiral?" Silence on the channel. I could imagine the confusion on that Imperial bridge. This was not how surrenders went. This was not how anything went. A lone ship, hopelessly outnumbered, inviting the fleet to fire on it. The Admiral must have thought it was a trick, some kind of trap. But he had 200 ships and 6 dreadnoughts and orders straight from the Emperor, and what could one vessel possibly do? "Very well," the Admiral said. "You've chosen your death. All ships open fire." I have tried to describe a lot of things in this story. The ship coming through the gate, the scars, Elena's kindness, and I've managed more or less. I cannot describe what came next, but I'll try. 200 Imperial warships opened fire at once. The space between the fleet and the Perseverance turned into light, solid light. Every color there is and some there aren't. Ion cannons, plasma lances, mass drivers, the great spinal guns of the dreadnoughts. Everything all at once. A wall of destruction pouring into a single point in space where one small scarred ship floated. The bridge went white. I threw my arm over my eyes. Asuk made a sound like a dying animal. The whole ship shook and rang and groaned and alarms screamed, and I truly thought, this is it. This is where we die. She was wrong, the plan failed, we're all. And then it stopped. The firing stopped, the light faded, the alarms wound down. And I lowered my arm and I looked, and the Perseverance was still there. It was still there. The shields were glowing, brighter than I'd ever seen them, a deep furious blue radiating heat and light from having absorbed the combined firepower of 200 warships. But they were holding. The ship was intact, not a single breach, not a single hull plate cracked. The combined might of 2 Imperial fleets had crashed against one old diplomatic transport, and the transport had simply taken it, absorbed it, endured it. Persevered. On the bridge, nothing had even fallen over. Elena hadn't moved from her chair. She sat exactly as she had before, small and calm, hands folded, and she waited for the shields to stop glowing, and then she keyed her calm, and her voice went out to 200 stunned Imperial ships. "That was everything you had," she said softly. "Wasn't it, Admiral? Every gun, every dreadnought, your absolute best, and here I still am." A pause. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because you needed to see it, because someone lied to you. Someone told you humans were weak, that our strength was a trick, that you could crush us easily. And they sent you all the way out here, 200 ships full of good people, to die proving that lie. And you almost did. You almost all died, for a lie. To protect the reputation of a man sitting safe and comfortable back at the core, who will never once think about your names." The channel was dead silent. 200 ships, not one word. "I don't want to hurt you," Elena went on, and now her voice cracked just slightly, the exhaustion and the emotion bleeding through. "I have never wanted to hurt you. I came here to save you, not from humanity, from your own leaders, who would spend your lives like water and never lose a night's sleep over it. You just fired everything you had at me, and I let you, and I did not fire back, and I am not going to fire back, because you are not my enemy. You have never been my enemy. You're just people. Good people, most of you, doing a terrible job because someone in power told you to. And I would rather die than kill you for it." I looked at Asuk. He was weeping again, openly, all four hands pressed to his face. And when I looked around the bridge at the human crew, I saw that some of them were crying too, because they meant it, every word. This wasn't a tactic. This wasn't manipulation. This small, tired woman had just stood in front of 200 guns and taken their fire rather than return it. And every soul on that bridge would have done the same, because that was who they were. Winning isn't enough. How you win is everything. They could have destroyed that fleet. Elena had said so days before in her office. One ship against 200 and they'd win, and it wouldn't even be difficult. But winning that way, killing 200 ships full of people who were only following orders, would have made them into monsters, would have proven Kaloth right, would have started the very war they came to prevent. So instead they chose the harder thing, the so much harder thing. They chose to stand there and take everything the fleet could throw at them, and not throw anything back and talk. And it was working. The Admiral's voice came back on the channel, and it was different now. The coldness was gone. What was left was a man who had just watched his entire fleet's firepower accomplish nothing, and who was, for the first time, actually thinking. Ambassador Marsh, a long pause. My sensors confirm your vessel is undamaged. Combined fleet fire 0 effect. That's, another pause, that's not possible. It's very possible, Elena said gently. It's just been kept from you. Your empire has been so certain of its own supremacy for so long that it never once imagined it might meet something stronger. And when it finally did, when a single one of our older ships shrugged off a border station's guns, the men in power couldn't admit it, couldn't face what it meant. So they lied, to you, to the Emperor, to everyone. And they sent you here to die maintaining that lie. Admiral, I'm not your enemy. The man who sent you here is. High Administrator Kaloth, the Admiral said slowly. You know him, then? I know of him, a grim silence. He assured the War Council this would be a simple demonstration, that your ship's defenses were a sensor trick, that we would crush you in minutes. The Admiral's voice hardened, but not at Elena, at something else, someone else, somewhere far away. He sent 200 ships and 6 dreadnoughts to crush a sensor trick. He sent 200 ships to die, Elena said quietly, so he wouldn't have to admit he was wrong. That's what pride does, Admiral, when it sits in a chair of power for too long. It stops seeing people as people. It starts seeing them as counters on a board. Your crews, your officers, your dreadnoughts to Kaloth, those were just tokens he could spend to protect his position. And he spent them without a second thought. What happened next, I still can hardly believe. The Admiral, his name, I learned later, was Vantor, and he'd served the Empire faithfully for 40 years. The Admiral went quiet for a long, long time. And I could feel, across the light minute of space between us, a man wrestling with the biggest decision of his life. Because Elena had put him in an impossible position. She'd shown him undeniably that his orders were built on a lie, that the man who'd given them had sent his fleet to die, but she'd also given him a choice. She hadn't destroyed his fleet. She hadn't forced his hand. She'd left him free to decide. And that freedom was the most dangerous thing of all, because a man forced into something can tell himself he had no choice. A man given a real choice has to own it. Ambassador, Admiral Vantor said finally, if I return to the Corps and report that I could not destroy you, that your vessel was invulnerable to my fleet, Kaloth will call me a coward and a traitor. He'll say I failed. He'll say I lost my nerve. He'll have me stripped of rank and possibly executed, and he'll send another fleet and another until either you're destroyed or the Empire runs out of ships. That's what he is. He would rather burn the whole Empire down than admit he was wrong. I know, Elena said softly, I know that's the danger, which is why I'm not going to ask you to just go home and report failure. She leaned forward in her chair. Admiral, I have a different proposal, and I think it's the only way this ends without a real war. I need you to hear me out. I'm listening, Vantor said. And I realized, standing there at the back of the bridge with tears drying on Asuk's gray face, that the tide had just turned. That an imperial admiral, 40 years loyal, had just said I'm listening to a human ambassador he'd been ordered to kill. That's what humans did, I was learning. They didn't win by being stronger even when they were stronger. They won by refusing to let you be their enemy. By standing in front of your guns and taking your fire and saying, over and over, you don't have to do this. You're not my enemy, let me help you, until you finally believed it. Elena's proposal was this. She would go to the capital as she'd always intended, but she wouldn't go alone. Admiral Vantor and his fleet would escort her, not as captors, but as an honor guard. And when they arrived at the core, they would arrive together. The human ambassador and the imperial fleet, side by side, as proof that humanity and the empire could stand together instead of against each other. And more than that, Admiral Vantor would testify. Before the emperor, before the whole war council, he would tell the truth. What he'd seen. What his fleet's guns had done, which was nothing. He would tell the emperor that Kaloth had lied, had sent 200 ships to die for a falsehood, and that the only path forward that didn't end in the empire's destruction was peace. They'll call you a traitor, Elena warned him. Kaloth will. He'll fight you every step. He'll try to have you silenced. It's the most dangerous thing you could possibly do. Ambassador, Vantor said, and there was something like a bitter laugh in his voice. I have just watched my entire fleet fire everything it has at a single ship and fail to leave a mark. I have just learned that the man I take my orders from sent me here to die for his vanity. I think I'm past worrying about what's dangerous. A pause. You stood in front of my guns and did not fire back. You could have destroyed us all, and you chose not to, and you wept for crews you'd never met. If a human ambassador can show that kind of courage, I think an imperial admiral can manage to tell the truth, even to the emperor, even with Kaloth in the room. And so the strangest fleet in the history of the galaxy formed up and set course for the imperial core. 200 imperial warships, 6 dreadnoughts, and in the center of them, not as a prisoner but as the guest of honor, one scarred gray human vessel named Perseverance, carrying a small tired ambassador who had, without firing a single shot, turned a fleet sent to kill her into a fleet sworn to protect her. I stood on the bridge and watched the fleet fall into formation around us, all that gold and pride now arrayed not against the humans but with them. And I thought about how I'd stood on the observation deck of Ketharis just days before, and watched this same ship come through the gate and been so afraid. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was something else, something I didn't have a word for then and barely have one for now. I think it was hope. Asuk stood beside me watching the same thing, and after a while he said quietly, "They're going to the Emperor, to Thas himself, and Kaloth will be there, and Kaloth won't give up. Men like that never give up. They'd rather the whole thing burn." "I know," I said. "So it's not over." "No," I agreed. "It's not over. The hardest part is still coming. Getting a fleet to stand down is one thing. Getting an emperor to admit he was wrong, with the man who lied to him standing right there fighting for his life, that's something else." Asuk was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you think she can do it, the ambassador?" I thought about Elena Marsh. The tears in her office when she learned the fleet was coming. The way she'd sat perfectly still while 200 ships fired everything they had. The way she'd wept, on the comm, for imperial crews she'd never met, while she refused to fire a single shot back at them. I thought about the name on the hull, Perseverance, and the tally marks. A time this ship should have died, dozens of them, and it was still here. "I think," I said slowly, "that she's going to walk into the throne room of the most powerful empire in the galaxy, with the man who tried to have her killed standing right there, and she's going to refuse to leave until she's saved every life she can. And I think Kaloth has no idea what he's up against, because he thinks strength is about being unbreakable. And she knows something he'll never understand." "What's that?" That the strongest thing in the galaxy, I said, isn't the thing that can't be broken. It's the thing that breaks and breaks and breaks and gets up every single time anyway, and refuses, absolutely refuses to become cruel while it does. The fleet finished forming up. The jump gate began to spin. And together, humans and empire, enemy and enemy turned something not quite friends yet. We set course for the heart of the empire, and whatever was waiting for us there. But that, the throne room and Kaloth, and what Elena Marsh did in front of the emperor of the whole galaxy, that's the last part of the story. I had never seen the imperial core before, neither had Asuk. Most beings like us, working the frontier our whole lives, never do. It's the center of everything, and the center of everything doesn't want people like us anywhere near it. But there we were, on the bridge of a human warship, in the middle of an imperial fleet, coming through the final jump gate into the home system of the Galactic Empire itself. And it was beautiful. I have to say that even now, even after everything, it was beautiful. The imperial homeworld hung there in the dark, a jewel of blue and white, ringed by orbital cities that glittered like a crown. There were shipyards the size of moons, defense platforms bristling with enough firepower to shatter continents, and the fleets, oh, the fleets. If Vantor's 200 ships had frightened me, the home fleet was beyond counting. Thousands of vessels, a wall of imperial might that had never once, in 10,000 years, been challenged. And into all of that came our strange procession. Vantor's fleet, escorting one scarred gray human ship, requesting audience with the Emperor. Steady, Elena said again from her chair. She'd said it a lot, that word. It had become a kind of anchor. Everyone steady. We're not here to fight, we're here to talk. Nobody fires, no matter what. The home fleet, of course, had heard the reports. They knew what had happened at the frontier, or at least, they knew Kaloth's version of it, which was that Vantor had failed and possibly defected, and that the human ship was to be treated as hostile. So the home fleet moved to intercept us. Thousands of ships, shifting into attack formation, weapons coming online, a wall of guns turning to face one small vessel and the 200 ships that had chosen to stand with it. And Admiral Vantor did something I'll always respect him for. He put himself between them and us. His flagship moved forward ahead of the Perseverance, and he opened a channel to the home fleet, and his voice, an admiral speaking to admirals, went out across the system. "This is Fleet Admiral Vantor of the 3rd and 7th Fleets," he said. "The human vessel is under my protection. It carries an accredited ambassador, and it has committed no crime. I have seen with my own eyes what you have been told is a lie. I have fired my entire fleet's weapons at this ship and left no mark, because it is stronger than anything we have, and the men who told you otherwise are the ones who should answer for treason, not this ambassador. I am escorting her to the Emperor. Anyone who fires on her fires on me. And anyone who fires on me had better be very, very sure they're on the right side of history, because I promise you, this is the day the whole galaxy changes, and your grandchildren will ask you which side you were on." Silence across the home fleet. And then one by one, the guns powered down. Because Vantor was respected. 40 years of loyal service meant something, and an admiral like that does not put himself between the home fleet and a foreign ship for no reason. The other admirals knew him. They trusted him, and when he said he'd fired everything at this ship and left no mark, they believed him, and they were afraid, and they stood down. All except one squadron, a squadron of fast attack ships, commanded by an officer loyal to Kaloth who had, I later learned, specific private orders. And that squadron broke formation and accelerated and launched a spread of torpedoes, not at the Perseverance, which they knew they couldn't hurt. At Vantor's flagship. It happened fast. I barely understood it as it was happening. Kaloth's loyalists knew they couldn't destroy the human ship, so they went for the thing that could be destroyed, Admiral Vantor, the traitor, the man whose testimony could bring Kaloth down. Kill Vantor, and the truth dies with him. That was the plan. The torpedoes streaked toward Vantor's flagship, and Vantor's ship was a fine imperial warship, but it was not the Perseverance, and those torpedoes would have gutted it and killed him and everyone aboard. But they never reached it, because the Perseverance moved. I have told you how that ship moved, careful, considerate, aware of exactly how much space it took up. Well, it can move another way too when it needs to, and it needed to now. It crossed the distance between itself and Vantor's flagship in a fraction of a second, faster than anything that big has any right to move, and it put itself directly in the path of the torpedoes. And the torpedoes hit it, and splashed off its shields like everything else had, and Vantor's flagship was safe. Elena's voice went out on an open channel, and for the first time since I'd met her, there was real steel in it. Not cruelty, never cruelty, but steel. "That's enough," she said. "You will not murder a man for telling the truth. Not while I'm here. Not while I can stop it. Stand down, all of you. Now. I have absorbed the fire of 200 ships, and I have not fired back once, and I will keep not firing back, but I will put this ship between your torpedoes and every innocent life you aim them at, for as long as it takes, until you understand that the killing stops here." The squadron that had fired hesitated. And in that hesitation, Vantor's own fleet moved to surround them, weapons online, and the rebel squadron found itself outnumbered and outmaneuvered. And its commander, I'll give him this, was not willing to die for Kaloth. He surrendered. And just like that, the last resistance in space collapsed. The home fleet stood down. Vantor's fleet held formation. The Perseverance returned to its place, and Elena Marsh, Ambassador of Humanity, was cleared to descend to the imperial palace to stand before the Emperor. She asked me and Asuk to come with her. I said I wasn't sure I belonged in a throne room. She looked at me, this small, tired woman who just faced down a fleet, and she said, "You belong there more than anyone. You're a working being from the frontier. You're exactly the kind of person the Emperor never sees and never thinks about, and whose life he spends without ever knowing your name. He needs to look at you. He needs to see a face. Come with me, please." So we went. The imperial palace was the most magnificent thing I have ever seen, and I hated it a little, because I kept thinking about how much it had cost, and who had paid for it, and how many frontier stations could have had their flickering lights fixed for the price of a single golden corridor. We were escorted through halls of impossible splendor. Guards in ceremonial armor lined every wall. And at the end of it all was the throne room, a vast chamber, big enough to hold a small ship, its ceiling lost in shadow far above, and at the far end, raised on a dais of white stone, the throne of the Galactic Empire. And on it Thas the Ninth, Emperor of 100 worlds, an old man thin and gray, draped in robes worth more than everything I would earn in 100 lifetimes. He did not look cruel. That surprised me. He looked tired and old and a little bit lost, like a man who had held enormous power for so long that he'd forgotten what it was for. And beside the throne, standing where a trusted advisor stands, was High Administrator Kaloth. I knew him the moment I saw him. You always know the type: sleek, well-fed, comfortable. A man who had never once in his life stood in front of a gun. A man who spent other people's lives the way I spent pocket change. He watched us enter with an expression of perfect calm, but his eyes were calculating fast, already looking for the angle, already planning how to turn this to his advantage. Elena walked the length of that enormous room, small and tired in her plain gray uniform, past all the guards and all the splendor, and she stopped at the foot of the dais and looked up at the Emperor, and she did not bow. A murmur went through the room. You bowed to the Emperor. Everyone bowed to the Emperor. It was the oldest law there was. Elena didn't bow, but she wasn't defiant about it. She simply stood straight and calm, and she inclined her head slightly, the way you'd nod to an equal, and she said, "Emperor Thas, my name is Elena Marsh. I'm an ambassador of humanity. Thank you for seeing me. I'm sorry it's come to this. I want you to know that everything I've done from the moment I entered your space, I've done to prevent what's coming, not to cause it. I have absorbed the fire of 2 of your fleets, and I have not killed a single one of your people. I would very much like to keep it that way. So I'm asking you, one leader to another, will you hear me?" Before the emperor could answer, Kaloth stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said smoothly, "this creature has attacked an imperial station, corrupted a loyal admiral into treason, and now stands in your throne room refusing to bow. She speaks of peace while her ship threatens the home fleet itself. This is not diplomacy. This is invasion dressed in soft words. I advise." "You advise," Elena said quietly, "the same thing you advised when you told the War Council my ship's defenses were a censor trick, when you sent 200 ships and 6 dreadnoughts to die proving a lie. Tell me, High Administrator, how many of those crews would still be alive right now if I were the monster you've painted me to be? I had 2 of your fleets helpless in front of me. Your own doctrine says I should have destroyed them. Why do you suppose I didn't?" Kaloth's mouth opened and closed. Elena turned back to the emperor, and she did something I did not expect. She gestured back down the long room at me and Asuk, standing awkwardly near the entrance. "Emperor," she said, "before I say anything else, I want you to look at those 2 beings. That's a cargo clerk and a dock worker from Ketharis Station, out on your frontier. They were on the observation deck when my ship arrived. Your administrator here would call them nobody, just workers, counters on a board. But they came all this way, into a throne room they were never meant to see, because they wanted to know how this story ends. Look at them, because they are the ones your decisions actually fall on. Not you, not him," she nodded at Kaloth. "Them, the people who fix the lights and move the cargo and keep your empire actually running, and who die in the wars that men in comfortable rooms decide to start. Look at them, Emperor, and remember them when you decide what to do next." And Emperor Thas, old, tired Thas, actually looked. He looked down that long room at me and Asuk, and I felt his gaze land on me, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I met it. I didn't bow either. I just looked back at him. One working being, tired in a different way than he was, looking at the man who'd spent my whole life spending lives like mine without ever once thinking about it. And something moved in the old man's face, just a flicker, but it was there. "Tell me then, Ambassador," the Emperor said, and his voice was thin and old, but there was something real in it now, something awake. "Tell me what you came all this way to say, and tell me the truth, because I am very old and I am very tired of being lied to, and I think—" He glanced sideways at Kaloth, and Kaloth went very still. "I think I have been lied to a great deal." So Elena told him. She told him everything. The truth about humanity's strength not to threaten, but so he'd understand the stakes. She told him that if it came to real war, the Empire would lose completely, and that she took no joy in that, because it would mean the deaths of millions who'd never chosen the fight. She told him about the colony convoy the Kest had raided, years ago, and the human pilot who'd driven his reactor into the enemy flagship rather than let farmers die, and had said, "We've got this," while he did it. She told him what humans were, not conquerors, not vermin, but a people who had spent their whole short history as the underdog, learning the one thing the Empire had never had to learn: how to survive when you're the small one, how to endure when the odds say you're finished, how to persevere. "Your empire is old and strong," she said, "but it has never once had to persevere at anything, because it has never once been in real danger of losing, and a thing that has never had to fight to survive doesn't know what it's made of. My people have had to fight for every single day of our existence. That's the difference between us. Not our ships, not our guns, that." "And what," the Emperor asked, "do you want? If not conquest, if not revenge for the years we detained your ships and called your people vermin, what do you actually want, Ambassador?" Elena was quiet for a moment. Peace, she said simply. That's all. A real peace between equals. Open your borders and we'll open ours. Trade freely. Let your people and mine learn from each other. You have 10,000 years of history and art and knowledge that would astonish us. We have a small, tired smile. We have a stubbornness that might do your empire some good. Stop trying to grind us down, and we'll stop having to prove we can't be ground down. And both our peoples can spend the next 10,000 years building things instead of breaking them. And if I say no, the emperor asked, if my pride or his, another glance at Kaloth, demands that the empire not bend to a smaller power, then a lot of people die who don't have to, Elena said. And you lose anyway. And 100 years from now, historians will write about the emperor who had a chance for peace standing right in front of him and threw away a generation of his own people rather than take it. That's the choice, emperor. It's not between winning and losing. You've already lost in any war sense, you just don't know it yet. The choice is between losing gracefully, with your people alive and your dignity intact and a real future ahead, or losing catastrophically with your fleets shattered and your worlds in chaos and your name a curse. That's the whole decision, and I can't make it for you. Nobody can. It's yours. Kaloth couldn't stand it any longer. Your Majesty, this is madness, he burst out. You cannot seriously consider surrendering to these primitives. The empire has stood for 10,000 years. We do not bend. We do not bow. If we show weakness now before this creature and her one ship, every client species in the galaxy will see it and they'll rise up and the empire will fall. Better to fight and die with honor than to die, Elena cut in, and her voice was very quiet now and very cold. With whose honor exactly? Yours. You've never risked a thing. You'll be safe in this palace while the fleets you send die at the frontier. Don't talk to me about honor, High Administrator. You sent 200 ships to die for a lie you told to protect your own position, and when your plan failed, you tried to have the admiral who discovered your lie assassinated in orbit. That's not honor. That's a coward hiding behind other people's courage. She turned to the emperor. He's not afraid of the empire falling, emperor. He's afraid of himself falling, of you finding out he lied. Everything he's advised you from the beginning has been to protect Kaloth, not the empire. And he'll keep advising you to burn the whole galaxy down, right up until the moment it costs him personally. Because that's the only calculation that man has ever made. The throne room was dead silent. Emperor Thas looked at Kaloth, and Kaloth for the first time looked afraid, because the old man's eyes had changed. The lost, tired look was gone. What was left was the gaze of someone who had ruled for 60 years, who was not, whatever else he was, a stupid man, and who was finally seeing clearly. Admiral Vantor, the emperor said without looking away from Kaloth, you are here, come forward, tell me. Did the High Administrator tell the War Council the human ship's defenses were a censor trick? Vantor stepped forward from where he'd been standing near the entrance. He did, Your Majesty, in those exact words. He assured us the demonstration would be simple, that we would crush the human vessel in minutes. And was it a censor trick? No, Your Majesty. I fired the combined weapons of 2 full fleets at that ship, 6 dreadnoughts, everything we had. It left no mark. The ambassador's strength is real and total, and the High Administrator either knew that and lied, or was too proud to find out and lied anyway. Either way, he sent 200 ships to their deaths, and only the ambassador's mercy is the reason they came home. And the torpedoes fired at your flagship in orbit just now, by a squadron loyal to the High Administrator. Fired on his standing orders, we believe, Your Majesty, to silence me before I could testify. The human ship shielded me. I would be dead otherwise, and you would be hearing only the High Administrator's version of events. The emperor was silent for a long time. Then he said very quietly, Guards, take the High Administrator into custody. He will answer for the deaths he caused and the murder he attempted. Every one of those 200 crews will know his name, and know what he did, and know that it was the human ambassador's mercy, not his wisdom, that brought them home alive. Kaloth started to protest, to bluster, to threaten, and then the guards took his arms, and he seemed to shrink, all his sleekness collapsing, and he was led away, and he was just a small frightened man after all, which is all he'd ever been under the power he'd wrapped himself in. And then the emperor turned back to Elena Marsh, small and tired at the foot of his dais, and he did the thing that no one in that room had ever expected to see. He stood up from his throne, and he came down the steps of the dais, slowly, an old man's careful steps, until he stood on the floor, on the same level as the ambassador. And he inclined his head to her, not a bow exactly, but a nod, the nod you give an equal. "Ambassador Marsh," he said, "on behalf of the Empire I accept your offer of peace, and I thank you for having the courage to cross the galaxy to save the lives of people who called you vermin and fired on your ship. You have shown me something today that 60 years on this throne never did. You've shown me what real strength looks like." He paused. "It doesn't look like a fleet, does it?" "No, Your Majesty," Elena said softly. "It never did. I wish I could tell you the whole galaxy changed in a day. It didn't. These things take time, but that was the day it started to change. That was the day the state of emergency was lifted, and the fleet stood down, and the first true peace between humanity and the Empire was signed. Not a surrender, not a conquest, but an agreement between equals, witnessed by an admiral who'd chosen truth over orders, and an emperor who'd finally chosen his people over his pride. And witnessed, too, by a cargo clerk and a dockworker from a nowhere station on the edge of the frontier, who Elena Marsh insisted stand at her side when the treaty was signed. Because, she said, the people who fix the lights and move the cargo should be there when the future gets decided, for once. I got to shake the emperor's hand, me, a cargo clerk. He looked at me and he asked my name and I told him, and he actually remembered it. He used it later when he thanked us all. I don't know if that means anything to you, but it meant something to me. For my whole life, I'd been nobody to men like that, a counter on a board, and Elena Marsh had made an emperor learn my name. That's what she did, you see. That's what the humans did. They didn't just win. They dragged the rest of us up to stand beside them while they did it. They made the small ones matter. The Perseverance left the Corps a few weeks later, mission complete. Elena offered to take me and Asuk home to Ketharis, and we went, and I stood on that warm bridge one last time and watched the imperial homeworld shrink behind us. Rhea found me there at the back of the bridge and stood beside me for a while, and I asked her the question that had been sitting in me since the very first day, since I'd stood on the observation deck and watched the scarred gray ship come through the gate. "The tally marks," I said. "On the whole, a time this ship should have died. There are dozens of them. How does one ship survive that many times it should have been destroyed? What's the secret?" And Rhea smiled, and she thought about it, and then she gave me the answer I've carried ever since. "There's no secret," she said. "That's the thing everyone gets wrong. They think we've got some trick, some edge, some secret strength. We don't. The shields are good, sure, the ship's tough. But that's not why we're still here." She looked at the tally marks through the viewport. "We're still here because every single time, every single one of those marks, somebody aboard decided that today was not the day we quit. That's it. That's the whole secret. There isn't a battle in the galaxy that's won by the strongest side. It's won by the side that decides when everything's falling apart and the odds say you're finished. Not today. Not us. Not yet. Get up." She turned to me. "That's what perseverance means. It's not a strength you're born with. It's a choice you make, over and over, every time you get knocked down, and you can teach it to anybody. You can teach it to a whole species. You can even," she smiled, "teach it to an empire if you're patient, and you're kind, and you refuse to give up on them even when they fire everything they've got at you." That was many years ago now. I'm old myself these days, older than I ever expected to get, working the frontier. The peace held, it's still holding. Humanity and the Empire side by side, 10,000 years of history and a stubborn young species learning from each other, building things instead of breaking them, exactly like Elena said. The frontier's different now. Better. They fixed the lights on Ketharis, finally. Somebody remembered we existed. Elena Marsh went on to do a great many things. She's a name in the history books now, the ambassador who prevented the war that would have killed millions. Admiral Vantor served with honor to the end of his life, respected by humans and Empire alike. Even old Emperor Thas, he died a few years after, but he died having done the one great thing of his reign, and they say he was at peace with it. And me, I went back to moving cargo, truly. That's all I ever was, a cargo clerk on a nowhere station. But I got to be there. I got to stand on that bridge and watch a small, tired woman face down 200 warships and refuse to fire back. I got to watch an empire learn what real strength looks like. I got to have my name remembered by an emperor for one shining moment, because a human ambassador decided the small ones mattered. People ask me sometimes, when they hear I was there, they ask me what the humans are really like. What their secret is. How a species that started so small, so squishy, so unremarkable, ended up the ones who taught the whole galaxy how to be better. And I tell them what Rhea told me. There's no secret, there's no trick. There's just a choice made over and over every time you get knocked down. Not today, get up. And then I tell them about the scars. How every other species in the galaxy buffed their damage out, hid their wounds, made their warships look untouchable. And how the humans left their scars showing, not out of neglect, as a message. Look at everything that tried to kill us. Look at how it failed. Look at how we're still here. That's the humans, that's the whole thing, not unbreakable, never unbreakable, just unwilling to stay broken. A species that had been knocked down so many times it had forgotten how to fear being knocked down, and had learned instead the one thing that actually wins in the end. How to get back up. Every single time. I stood on that observation deck all those years ago and watched the smallest human ship come through the gate and make the biggest empire in the galaxy declare a state of emergency. And I was afraid. We all were. We shouldn't have been. Because the ship wasn't there to conquer us. It never was. It was there, that scarred gray vessel with the stubborn name, to do the hardest thing there is. Not to win. Anybody can win if they're strong enough. It was there to win without becoming cruel. To hold all the power in the galaxy and choose, instead, to be kind. To stand in front of every gun that fired at it and say, over and over, you're not my enemy, let me help you, until an entire empire finally believed it. That's the strongest thing I ever saw, stronger than any fleet, stronger than any dreadnought. A small, tired woman on a scarred gray ship who could have burned the galaxy down, and chose instead to teach it how to persevere. I hope wherever she is now, she knows what she gave us. I hope she knows we finally got back up. All of us together. Just like she showed us how.